The sauropod dinosaurs were the uncontested rulers of the Mesozoic landmass. This video explores the giants among the giants, the Megasauropods. So what is a Megasauropod? I define it as a sauropod dinosaur that weighed an average of 40,000 kilograms or more. That sounds like an insane number, and it is. It takes a slew of evolutionary innovations to develop a body plan that can outmass an average African elephant by nearly 8 times. A recent Scientific American article by sauropod paleontologist Michael Demick covers some of those adaptations, and how sauropods used them to become gigantic repeatedly. First off, sauropods knew how to grow better than anybody. Since the need for embryonic gas exchange greatly restricts the size of eggs, sauropods had to hatch relatively small and then explode, multiplying their mass by tens of thousands of times throughout their lifetime. Their young experienced up to a 100-fold length increase from hatching, the equivalent of a 20-inch human baby reaching 166 feet long at adulthood. In order to fuel this non-stop leveling up, sauropods had to eat constantly. Everything about them was designed to take in as much food as possible as quickly as possible, turning it into bone, muscle, and other bodily materials to help them grow to even more absurd sizes. And when you're in an endless state of swallowing, who has time to chew? Instead of evolving the complex and bulky headgear required for chewing, sauropods opted for fermentation-aided digestion, with massive gut chambers to hold and digest food with the help of bacteria. That let their skulls stay small, which let their necks grow long, which gave them access to vegetation that no other animals could reach. This in turn allowed them to extract more energy from their environment than other animals, which created a feedback loop of gigantism that continued until sauropods went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous period. They produced massive amounts of young, relying on sheer numbers to ensure the next generation's survival, and they grew quickly to protect themselves from the monsters they lived alongside. Their respiratory systems were extraordinarily efficient, resembling the peak performance apparatus of birds, and their pneumatized skeletons were strong enough to support the oppressive weight of their building-sized bodies. All in all, sauropods created the perfect storm of physiological and behavioral characteristics that allowed them to dwarf all other forms of terrestrial animals. The biggest land mammals look like toddlers when stacked up against absolute units like Argentinosaurus. So now that we have a better understanding of why sauropods were so big, let's look at how big they actually were. We'll categorize them into 6 classes based on average body mass, starting small and ending with the biggest sauropods discovered to date. We'll also assign each animal a Jerry score, or how many 5.3-ton African elephant bulls we'd need to match the mass of each sauropod. You remember Jerry. Jerry says hi. First up is the stomper class. While the smallest qualifying class of megasauropods at 40 to 49 metric tons, these are still far larger than any other group of terrestrial animals. We start off the tier with Proboscis garazbe at 40 tons. This was an African diplodocid that lived during the late Cretaceous period. Most of the other vertebrates it shared its environment with were fish, amphibians, and turtles, as well as some famous dinosaurs like Carcharodontosaurus, Sauroniops, and Spinosaurus. It was likely a close relative of the gigantic Marapunisaurus, which we'll discuss later in the video. It surprised me that the average mass for Supasaurus viviene was so low at 40.3 tons. A Jurassic diplodocid from the Morrison Formation of Western North America, it was extremely lightweight and long. This average mass estimate is assuming that BYU 9024, previously assigned to Barosaurus, actually belongs to a 39-meter Supersaurus as established by Brian Curtis in 2021. If we scale up paleontologists' recent estimates for smaller Supersaurus specimens, the BYU monster would have weighed about 57 tons. However, this could be considerably higher, as if we scale from independent volumetric models, BYU 9024 would be between 67 and 76 tons. We'll be conservative, however, and stick with a 40.3 ton average for the specimens we have masses for. Brachiosaurus altathorax is one of the most iconic sauropod species in history. Named arm lizard in 1903 for its astonishingly large forelimbs, it's one of those dinosaurs that every third grader knows. Its appearance in the first Jurassic Park film is a canon event in pop culture. It's also a massive beast, with recent estimates putting it at a solid 42 tons. Brachiosaurus is the flagship sauropod for the stomper class, and it's one with endless charisma. Next is Ruyengosaurus giganteus at 44 tons. This was a huge Chinese titanosaur described in 2009, but we don't know a whole lot else about it. Giraffatitan branchi was essentially a slightly bigger Brachiosaurus. Its most famous specimen, the mount in Berlin's Natural History Museum, was thought to actually be a Brachiosaurus until 1991. The mount is also the world's tallest skeleton mount, which is only appropriate for an animal that weighs 44 tons. Sauroposeidon proteles, the earthquake god lizard. Named after the Greek god of oceans and earthquakes, it lives up to the name with a 44.5 ton average mass. At up to 59 feet tall, it may very well have been the tallest dinosaur known. That's more than 3 times taller than the tallest giraffe ever recorded. It lived in tropical forests, deltas, and bayous, and when young would have needed to survive vicious attacks by the megatheropod Acrocanthosaurus. Mamenchisaurus jingyanensis is another Chinese giant. The genus was discovered during the construction of a highway in the 1950s, although this large species wasn't described until the 1990s. Right now it's on display at the Beijing Museum of Natural History and has an average mass of 45 tons. Turriosaurus riodavensis is a relatively obscure megasauropod. Tying with Mamenchisaurus at 45 tons, it's one of the biggest dinosaurs ever discovered in Europe. Uncovered in Spain in 2006, it towered over its Jurassic peers and laughed at their pathetic size estimates. We have yet to uncover any European theropods that could have taken this guy down. Asiatosaurus mongoliensis is another 45-tonner, but this one is known from Cretaceous Mongolia in China. A bit of a disclaimer is due here since it's only known from teeth, and tooth scaling is pretty inconsistent with most reptiles. But Molina Perez and Larramendi seemed confident with 45 tons for the animal, so here it is in the stomper class. Franco-Poseidon, quote-unquote, from Cretaceous France, has yet to be formally published. It's described from an incomplete femur but has been scaled by paleontologists to about 47 tons and 27 meters long, making it another contender for the biggest European dinosaur. It's certainly an interesting name. French Poseidon conjures some strange images. Dreadnoughtus shrani is the biggest member of the stomper class at 47.24 tons. Yeah, it's specific, but whatever. Just barely edging out the god of earthquakes and baguettes. It continues the trend of gigantic dinosaurs being found in Argentina and has one of the coolest names of any sauropod. It's a dreadnought. With legs. We level up to the kingkiller class, starting with Brachiosaurus sp. This indeterminate species of Brachiosaurus from Utah might belong to B. altithorax, but there's some speculation that it could be a gigantic Camarasaurus. The most recent estimates on this beast put it at 50 metric tons, baseline for a kingkiller sauropod. Notocolossus barely squeaks past the qualifying line at 50.1 tons. Yet another Argentinian titanosaur, Notocolossus was described in 2016 and is one of the few sauropod specimens to be preserved with a fossilized foot. Its own foot, of course, it wasn't weird. Paralotitan stromeri is again only 100 kilograms heavier than the previous kingkiller member. It's gonna enjoy the lead while it has it, and it revels in being one of the biggest dinosaurs known from Africa. It lived in a mangrove ecosystem, which is pretty awesome. Speaking of cool continents that start with A, let's go to Antarctosaurus giganteus. It's actually from South America, but hey, I'm not about to argue with a 50.5-ton animal. It has the longest complete femurs of any known sauropod. You think I'm gonna mess with that? Femurs are scary. Alamosaurus sanjuanensis is the reason for the kingkiller class name. It lived alongside Tyrannosaurus rex, but was so massive that it didn't have much to worry about. At 51.8 tons, it was heavier than 4 Copium rexes put together. If T-Rex pack hunting were a thing, then Alamosaurus would have something to worry about, but right now it's just ruling late Cretaceous North America. Patagotitan majorum, like many sauropods, went through the phase of being touted as the biggest dinosaur ever. It wasn't even close, but 56.6 tons is still quite respectable. A typical massive Argentinian titanosaur, it was described from 6 adult individuals that were all within 5% of one another's size. They weren't buried all at the same time though, which makes you wonder why they kept coming back to the site. This is complete speculation, but it wouldn't surprise me if sauropods engaged in memorial journeys like modern-day elephants, visiting the graves of relatives on the anniversaries of their deaths. Hey, stop crying, we have to finish watching the video. Puertasaurus is the king of the kingkillers at 58.75 tons. And it's from, you guessed it, Argentina, which seems to be the country to have given its sauropods the most steroids. When it comes to giant fossils, Argentina is just the T-Rex of countries. There's only one entry for the Titan class, and it's a bit of a weird one. Breviparopus is only known from a trackway in Morocco, and as we all know, with footprint scaling it's anyone's game. With that disclaimer out of the way, in 2020 it was estimated to be 33.5 meters long and to weigh 62 tons. Not bad for a footprint. The earthshaker class kicks things up a notch with Mamenchisaurus sinocanidorum, although recent studies indicate it may not be a Mamenchisaurus at all. 2 massive vertebrae were referred to this taxon by Gregory S. Paul and may or may not have belonged to it, but whatever they did belong to would have been about 70 tons. The Spanish giant is an informal name for an enormous footprint from, well, Spain. Molina Perez and Larramendi wrote that it seems to be a relative of Brachiosaurus, scaling it to between 70 and 72 tons. Turns out that Bigfoot was a sauropod, not a primate. Another ichnotaxon, or a taxon known from footprints, could have been even bigger. The Broome Sandstone Trackway in Australia is host to enormous footprints that have had a number of wild size estimates, some as high as 200 tons. Paul Naramendi 2023 concluded that the track maker was more likely in the 70 to 80 ton range, so we'll put down a nice 75 as a compromise since footprint scaling isn't super reliable. Speaking of 75 tons, say hello to the most famous titanosaur out there, Argentinosaurus wincolensis. Discovered in 1987 by an incredibly lucky farmer, Argentinosaurus remains the biggest terrestrial animal known from decently complete remains. It lived alongside the megatheropod Mapusaurus, which it may have occasionally noticed in the event of a theoretical pack hunt. An honorable mention for the earthshaker class is the Nemegtitanosaur from Mongolia, also known from footprints. I couldn't find any peer-reviewed estimates for its size, but depending on how you scale it, the beast could be too small to be a Megasauropod or comparable to Argentinosaurus. I won't solidly say that it's an earthshaker class animal, but it is possible. Onto the imperator class, where things get really crazy. Our first of two entries is material that's been referred to Argentinosaurus, but nobody's really sure what it is. Based on an incomplete femur 1.75 meters long that would have been 2.7 meters long in life, it would be slightly larger than Argentinosaurus proper. An average of only 2 mass estimates puts it at 88 tons. And if you're into sauropods, I'm sure you've heard of this lost giant, Marapunisaurus fragilis, previously known as Amphicoelius. Described by Edward Drinker Cope as a diplodocid 150 years ago, the fossils were lost forever to erosion. Kenneth Carpenter resurrected the animal as a Robachosaurid in 2018, and it's still massive. A combination of published estimates put this beast at an average of 89 tons. We can't be sure, however, since the bones disintegrated over a century ago. You can guess what our sole entry for the worldbreaker class is. The one, the only, the aggravating Bruhathcaeosaurus. If you'd asked me 2 years ago what I thought of this animal, I'd have told you that it was probably a tree, but 2 recent studies based on resurfaced photographs of the original material established that it was probably a colossal sauropod after all. Its insane size, what Paul and Naramendi regarded as a conservative range of 110 to 130 tons, is especially interesting given that it lived on an island in what is now India. Insular gigantism in a sauropod dinosaur, huh? What selective pressure would have been acting on its ancestors to make it grow so massive? Speculation about gigantic Indian theropods aside, Bruhathcaeosaurus is currently the king of the Megasauropods. While 120 tons is a solid conservative mean, the paper does mention that scaling from other close relatives' femurs implies masses of up to 170 tons, and much bigger sauropods are possible. I can't promise a specific release date yet, but I'm currently conducting research that should be public in February of next year on the maximum sizes of sauropod dinosaurs. So keep an eye out for Megasauropods Part 2, where we'll be discussing the biggest terrestrial animals possible. You'll find that information right here on the Vividen. Thanks for watching! Subscribe for more paleontology content and to stay updated on what I discover. Join the Vividen Discord server with a link in the description and join the channel for various perks. These can include leveling up loyalty badges, unique emojis, and early access to videos, and the Megasauropod tier lets you select a species profile video of your choosing. If the idea of a sauropod the size of a blue whale is cool, share this video with your friends. I'll see you next time.